and welcome to the Cuyamonga Institute, our Q&A Conversation for Exploration series. I'm Paul Robert, the Executive Director and President of the Institute, and along with my wife, Laura Lee, the Director of Research, Education, and Outreach. And on behalf of our Board of Directors, advisors, volunteers, and supporting members, we want to thank you for joining us today. The Cuyamonga Institute is an independent, nonprofit organization committed to researching consciousness and the human experience, following the footsteps of our founder, anthropologist Dr. Felicitas Goodman. And our focus is reflected in three main areas: experience, education, and exploration. We respect the path of academic balance, the creative pursuit of science, while advancing, conserving, and restoring a direct experience of the deeper human connection to all of life. And as an educational institution, we take an open approach, so we invite scholars in related fields to help broaden the scope of our own work and exploration, and that's why we call this Conversation for Exploration. And on these Sunday discussions, a full spectrum of topics from neuroscience and anthropology and archaeology and astronomy and philosophy and psychology and mythology and shamanism and art and theater and much, much more, from the arts to the sciences and everything in between. And you're welcome to visit us at our website at cuyamongainstitute.com. All of our presentations are free. And as a nonprofit, we invite you to become a supporting member. And we want to thank you, the community members who continue to support the mission of the Cuyamonga Institute. Today, we'll look at what it takes and how to embrace the power to change. Is there something you do or don't do that you'd like to see changed right now, but don't know how to make that happen? How do we align ourselves? How do we balance ourselves, mind, body, and spirit? Habits, the damaging patterns can be broken. The brain can be rewired. How does mindfulness, consciousness play into this discussion? Today, we'll hear one man's journey of transformation, recovery, and health. Our guest says, with the right conditions, people can change successfully, but transformation is not for the faint of heart. His story is an inspirational account of truly facing your demons and not backing down. And when we ask him how to describe himself, he says, what happens when Tony Soprano meets Deepak Chopra? That's how people have described my story. I might throw in some Woody Allen and a dash of Hunter S. Thompson. So Frank Ferrante, of his personal journey from obesity to drug addiction to vibrant health and happiness and overall being, we welcome today.
Well, no matter what our own particular challenges in life may be, our journey will take us on pretty much the same path. And it's a well-trod path to meet our mentors, our guardian angels, those threshold guardians, but most importantly, to face those dark nights of the soul and to surrender some part of ourselves as it falls away so that we may leap across the abyss and be reborn. To be, as our guest puts it, who we came to here to be. And that's always a fascinating and a heartfelt and an inspiring tale. And from those hard-won insights as we share notes with our fellow travelers, this is especially rewarding when with one as funny and wise and humble and open, and who has found redemption in the work that he does today to help others on their hero's journey. Frank Ferrante is an internationally known inspirational speaker. He's the author of the documentary film and book of the same name, May I Be Frank, How I Changed My Ways, Lost 100 Pounds, and Found Love. And he's joining us here today, all the way from Brooklyn to Sedona, Arizona. Welcome, Frank. And a lot of points in between. You've had a well-traveled journey. Good to have you here.
Hey, Frank.
Nice to be here. Thank you. I'm laughing because, I still am amazed that, I get to do these interviews and, because I messed up royally and survived, somehow that gives me some kind of credibility.
He's alive.
I think
it's like that Frankenstein thing. Oh my God, he's moving.
I think that's the bravest thing that we can do, though, is not back down. in the face of all the forces that come at you, right? But to
Right.
not back down, just to keep at it. That to me is the definition of the hero's journey. You keep going despite all odds.
Well, I thank you very much. That's that's a very sweet way of putting it. But I think, to be honest, there were times I did back down, and there were times when, I backed down, but the floor got too low and I had to get up. But I think sometimes when I do interviews, what surprises me is I really don't think there's anything special about me. It's just that my journey, a piece of my journey, was caught on film, and I subsequently wrote a book from a lot of encouragement from people to do so. And I would define my journey as a continual stumbling into grace. I would love to tell you I went to a Tony Robbins seminar, walked on fire, got my shit together. No, that's not what happened. It was a stumble and a getting up and stumbling again and getting up. And I think it's the getting up part that is significant for all of us. I don't really think there's anything particularly special about me. But I think what people respond to is a vision about themselves. Everything that people respond to in the film, I think, is something that they see in themselves or aspire to within themselves. I'm just like you or anybody else.
I appreciate your humbleness.
Yeah.
I think that's a key part of it. And your journey was caught on film. So tell us the circumstances of how
Start from
this
the
came
beginning.
to be.
Yeah.
Well, I'll give you a thumbnail sketch. I got to a point. I was at the time I was sober for 17 years, and so there wasn't a drug problem anymore. But drugs and alcohol are really, as they say, an indication of a deeper underlying condition. You take the drugs away. There's a saying: if you take the alcohol away from a drunken horse thief, what happens? Well, you have a sober horse thief, right? So you have to get to the underlying conditions that generated that lifestyle to begin with. And there were things I hadn't really addressed, and I was obese. I was like 300 something pounds, and very depressed, very lonely, and I was in a part of I was living in San Francisco at the time, and I went to my cousin Michelangelo, who was ill. And no, that's his real name, and he's not a Ninja Turtle. And so I went to this video place to get some Italian films. And in the background, there was this sign that said Cafe Gratitude. And in the recovery world, gratitude is a central virtue. And so I thought, well, somebody from AA was being clever and opened up a coffee shop called Cafe Gratitude. And I walked into this place and I noticed there wasn't a stove, there was no coffee. And, I walked up to one of the waiters and I said, "Hey, man, I had to have a cup of coffee in Cafe Gratitude. I figured somebody's here is in recovery." And he looked at me and said, "We're all recovering from something, aren't we?" And I immediately knew he wasn't a recovery person and probably smoked a joint before going to work, because everybody was so damn happy. And they were very kind, and I was very lonely, and I felt received and warm. And when you're that obese, you really feel unseen, because oddly enough, right? I was fat, and I felt unseen because all I was fat. And so I started going to this place regularly because they were so warm and I was so lonely, and I didn't really care about the food. I couldn't, if you're 325 pounds, you need more than, leaves to stay awake. And so I would leave there and have chicken and ribs or something. But at one point they came to my table and they said, there's something they do called they call the thought for the day. And it was supposed to, the service says it, and it's supposed to inspire meaningful conversation. And he goes, "What's something you want?" Question of the day: "What's something you want to do before you die?" And I, very sadly said, I wanted to fall in love one more time, but who's going to love me? Look at me, how's that going to happen? And apparently that inspired them, and they were looking for somebody they had an idea to make a film that was the opposite of Super Size Me, where the guy eats terrible food for a month, but they were looking for, but who walks into raw food vegan restaurants, right? Skinny white guys in dreadlocks with hemp woven tunics. And then all of a sudden in comes this lumbering half a gangster from Brooklyn, like, hey, what the fuck is this? Like, I thought vegan was a planet. I didn't know anything. And so they came to my table one day and they said, hey, Frankie, you know that movie Super Size Me? Yeah. What about it? Well, we want to do something that's like, we want
The
to make a
opposite
film
direction.
that's the opposite. We want to take a guy who's not well, which was a rather generous definition of my condition at the time, and feed him this food and go to health practitioners and journeys and stuff like that, and colonics, and we want you to be the guy. And I thought nothing of it. There were 6 guys. There were 3 boys. They were so young they could have shared a razor for 6 months. It would have still been sharp. They didn't have a camera. I had the most film experience because I had seen the most movies. We didn't have any idea of how to proceed. And the next thing I know, they're filming me. Or they gave them a key to my apartment. I gave them all a key to my apartment, and we made this contract. So it wasn't an enforceable document. It was a document, by a few guys that was rooted in heart and integrity. I had no idea of what I was getting into at all. But next thing I know, they're telling me what I'm going to eat, what I'm going to do, where I'm going to go, and all that stuff. And in the meantime, I was in graduate school because I got my high school diploma when I was 50, and then, got my degree in my BA in history and political science. And then I was getting my degree working on my degree in humanities. While all of this stuff was going on, and I'm going to colonics, and I'm thinking, I had WTF moments every 5 minutes, and so next thing I know, I make a film, and then I subsequently, not to get into some of the finer points of the film, but subsequently started working out, lost all, and eating properly, and I lost over 100 pounds, and I had forgotten about the film because it took. We had no money, and it took 2 years to do post-production. They thought there was an app for that, and so, we got to a point where we needed to do color correction, and it was $30,000. We didn't have $30,000. And one of the guys did was, he was a musician, and he got musicians all over San Francisco. He'd show them a clip, and they wrote a song. And then somehow Jason Mraz wrote the central song. I didn't even know who he was. And we had to do this $30,000. One of the musicians came up to me and said, hey, Frankie, I want to see what's going on. I want to see my song on the film. And I told her the problem. And the next day I get a call from this guy. He goes, look, I got a studio that you can use. I know you guys don't have the bread, but I got to put something on paper. I'm going to charge you $5,000, but you pay me when you can. Well, it just so happened that studio was Lucasfilm Studio. The color correction was done where Star Wars and Raiders of the Lost Ark was edited, sitting in Spielberg's chair. Yeah. Stuff like that, magic like that kept happening because we had no idea of what we were doing. And I normally don't use this type of new age language, but I really believe it was divinely guided because we didn't know what we were doing. We didn't know what to be afraid of. We didn't know what we weren't capable of doing. And so we just did it. And then, about 3 years after it was shot, I got a call saying, hey, the film is going to show. I said, what film? I didn't remember it. And then from there, this guy, I lost all this weight, but my emotional and spiritual development was not in step with my dramatic physical recovery. So I still saw the fat guy in the mirror. And the next thing I know, I'm walking into standing ovations and became the sort of a de facto spokesman for the mind-body-spirit connection to health and wellness. But in my mind, I was still the alcoholic dope fiend, and it felt like an imposter for the first year that I was doing this stuff. And and here I am, so and it's not like, I think people have they really have this desire, seems to be collectively innate, of the magic pill, whether that's medicine journeys or whether that's walking on fire. It's not, in my experience, it's been um, an incremental heart opening, an incremental ascension into another consciousness. And by the way,
Many
I could sit down and meditate for a half an hour. And I was living in Los Angeles, and I get in my car, and in 15 minutes after being in 405, I'm screaming my head off at somebody, in another car. And so people think there's this destination where, like, I think it's a really kind of immature way of looking at life, where you think that there's a place where you're going to be okay with everything all the time.
Yeah.
And it's not. It's how you deal with those things. Like, to me, when I work with people, and I work as a drug counselor, and I tell people that the most intelligent thing that man has ever developed was the concept of sailing, where it uses all the elements in concert to arrive at a destination. And sometimes you got the wind at your back, sometimes you don't, sometimes the sea is scary, stormy, and sometimes it's no wind at all. The idea is to get to the next port of call above the water, and to do that you need a crew, and that's where your relationships are vital to sustaining your life, your inner life. So it's really, life is about being a good sailor, and so and when those storms happen, it's a very egalitarian environment, right? You're all trying to you all have a singleness of purpose. You're all trying to stay above water, get to the next place safely. That's it, man, to me.
I appreciate that. It's not just the physical health, it's the emotional, it's the mental, it's the just showing up fully. How did you decide to then do those other pieces of it? What did you do from there? You'd regained some physical health. Then what? What did you do?
And then I continued my stumbling through life. I
It's helpful to have good tools for navigation on the journey. What did you
yeah. And it's I really think that that I'm no different than anybody else. As I said, I got a piece of my journey on film. I have my good days, I have my bad days. I think that through all the stuff, through all the therapy, through the drugs and the sobriety and sex and no sex and solitude and friends and all of it, through all of it, I still think I have every neurosis I ever had to begin with, except that they're not as loud and they don't last as long. I've learned to deal with these things. And, sometimes I'll wake up and before I even open my eyes, I think, oh man, you're a loser. Your life is, you haven't done anything with your life. You're really a piece of crap. You should just end it now. And this is before I fully open my eyes, and then it mitigates, right? Because I think, oh, I know you. It's like a cloud. I remember you. Come on in, have some tea. It's not about getting rid of it. I love in Sedona, but people talk about getting rid of their egos. I just sit back and watch the clown show. It's just really, I don't know about the swearing thing in this thing, because in Brooklyn I would have said, get the fuck out of here, but I actually talk to people who say things like, I used to make decisions predicated on my ego, but now that I've got that taken care of, I don't do that anymore. They actually say stuff like that. And and I tell them, I said, look, the moment the word ego enters the conversation, he's in the room. And they look at me with a disdain like I'm some barbarian. And maybe I am, I don't know. But I think it's not about getting rid of your ego. What a stupid thing to say. It's just really making peace with everything. And that's what I think aging is about. When I look at aging, and I tell people I'm 71. Oh, you're young. No, I'm not. I'm 71, but I'm inside. I figure still think I'm 20, but I think that the function or the purpose of one of the things to address in aging is forgiving everybody, everything. Because I've done a little hospice work, and what I learned is that you can be healed and not be cured. You could be dying of a particular ailment
Yeah.
and still be healed. And what I mean by that is you've made peace with everything,
Yeah.
because we're all leaving this thing at one point. But if, to leave it, with a sense of love and peace. And if people are crying at your funeral, you did your job.
Yeah. That's good.
You
stuff.
described the first third of your life as growing up in an abusive household. You described the second as getting over the wounds inflicted by that abuse. And you described the third as helping others get over their wounds. Do you want to speak to that?
Yeah.
Because you said you found redemption in helping others.
Well, I wrote a piece one time, an article, somebody wanted me to write an article on what it means to be a conscious man. Well, after I had to change my pants because I laughed so hard, like, you've got to be kidding. What I describe is like the first third of my life, I spent in terror of, the police, the mafia, my parents, and the Catholics. And the second third of my life, I spent either cooking heroin or looking down a tumbler full of vodka with a nose full of cocaine. And the third part of my life, I've been spending getting over the first two.
Yeah.
And part of that recovery and redemption is it's like I look at it like alchemy. Supposedly it's changing base metal into gold, but from a metaphysical standpoint, it's it's taking a situation that was horrific and transmuting it into a situation that affords you a language to enable other people to usher themselves out of suffering.
Mhm.
And at that point, it's no longer a charge. It's not something that you think about, but rather it's a tool to use. And then that's where the redemption is. I mean, I was ashamed of my drug addiction, 25 years of drug addiction. It's a lot of time. And for a long time, I was really ashamed of it, but I acted like I wasn't, but deep inside, I was really ashamed of it. And then one time I was facilitating a group with people that really had experienced really an Auschwitz level of suffering in their lives and abuse. And all of a sudden, within that group, I realized that there was no way these people would give me an ounce of credibility or would listen to anything I said had I not been able to relate to them with a language that indicated that I had a similar experience. And it was a really wonderful thing that happened. In that moment, when I realized that was happening in the group, I literally felt something leave my body. It felt like something just exited from my shoulders, and it was the shame. And I wasn't ashamed of it anymore, because I realized there's no way I could have done this with any kind of effectiveness had I not had a face-to-face experience with those really dark and ugly and painful experiences.
The wounded healer who lived to tell the tale and help others. So I got it wrong. The second third of your life was
More
not
of a heel than a healer.
the second part of your life was not getting over the wounds. That was later. It was numbing the wounds, I guess.
Right.
The alcohol
right.
and what is addiction like? I mean, it's interesting to me because evolution has set us up to seek pleasure or to seek, right? This is your expertise. Describe the biochemical mechanism and then how you deal with it.
Well, I refer to folks that don't have an effect and an experience with drug addiction as civilians, right? So, but everybody's got something, by the way.
Yeah.
But imagine the psychic torture of desperately wanting to stop doing something and not being able to do it. Nobody wants to be a drug addict. Nobody wants to come to in a crack house. Nobody wants to sell their body for drugs, and they can't stop. And through the years, it's been imposed upon people with that affliction as a choice. Like, you have a choice. And when you're in active addiction, you don't. Until you get to a point where what's referred to as a moment of clarity, and maybe there's a little opening where you can start that, Everest climb into, to recovery. But there's, in our society, there's a lot of other addictions that are encouraged. Workaholism, the whole Protestant ethic. I think Protestants did have a lot to answer for in this
Yeah, I do
country,
too.
but what's it like? It's like, not being able to, it's a torture, really. And what you'll do for a momentary relief from whatever that trauma is, because in my opinion, not every victim of trauma becomes a drug addict, but every drug addict is a victim of trauma. And what happens when you get into that lifestyle, you compound the original trauma. The problem with the drugs are that it doesn't go, it's not central. It doesn't go to the trauma point. It becomes global. And so it keeps you from having, what your soul yearns for. Your soul yearns for connection and love. And the addiction, the drug, prevents that from happening. The very thing your soul yearns for is inhibited by what you're using for relief. And then the relief becomes problematic.
And the drug can be many things, as you're mentioning. I mean, even a belief system of denial, of not allowing that shadow side to be embraced.
Right. Evangelism, just like somebody that, like I think that people often say, these little spiritual quips, the opposite of fear, opposite of faith is fear, and stuff like that. I love those little pithy things that really just open my consciousness, like everything happens for a reason. And people say that as if they're, just like gushing some kind of, really lofty notion, when Physics 101 will tell you that. But I think the opposite of faith is certainty. And people will kill for that stuff. And what that does for you is eliminate the notion of any kind of gray existential conflict of, inner conflict. And so everything's black and white and dictated for you. But people are addicted to their phones. People are addicted to distraction. And whatever that may be, like Gabor Mate said, food is not addictive, but some people have a problem with food. Shopping is not addictive. Drugs are not addictive, but it depends on what's going on with you and how you will incorporate those into your being. I mean, if drugs were addictive, then every old lady that goes in for a hip replacement would be a junkie, but that's not how it works. So I don't know if that answered your question, but I enjoyed saying it.
You say that every addict is going to find a loophole. That was interesting.
Well, yeah, because addicts have to be manipulative, right? They have secrets, so they're operating from a place of a covert place, and so they become extremely manipulative. And so that's why I said, like, every addict should consider going to law school, because if there's a loophole, they'll find it.
How did you beat your drug addiction and your alcohol addiction?
How did I beat it?
How did you solve it, cure it?
Well, how did I solve it? Well, I had reached a place, as they say in the recovery literature, of a place of pitiful and incomprehensible demoralization. And in my 30s, I was starting to lose control of my body, without getting graphic. And I just freaked out. My God, I'm only 30 something, and already I'm waking up like this. And then a friend, and this is where community comes in, a friend of mine who was even more of an addict than I was. I mean, he was a friend that was able, when I was ready to collapse, he was still ready to go party. And he was clean for 6 months. And I thought, well, if my friend Norman could do it for 6 months, then maybe I'll try this. And I thought I went to a 12-step program to learn how to drink like a gentleman, because I was a binger. I mean, I'd finish a quart of vodka a night. And I figured, well, I always wanted to drink like they do in the movies. They have 1 or 2 shots and that's it. I didn't know how to drink like that. And I thought I was going to learn how to do that in AA. Unbeknownst to me, that's not how it worked. So I said, no, you can't drink at all. I said, what? Well, just for today. And that's where the day at a time,
the incremental
thing, like, okay, if I had to think, I'll never again, but okay, I could do today. I could do this minute, I could do this minute, that's how it was sometimes. But also emotionally, that's how it is. Like, say, if a loved one, either a breakup or somebody for whatever reason, dies, spontaneously, gets into an accident or something, and you have to deal with that. And I use the same tools that I use in relieving my drug addiction in real life. When I would be in such emotional pain about something, and I would just take it a minute at a time, and then I do things like call people and actually reveal really what I was feeling. And there was a study done with Duke University and Arizona State University that over a number of years, they came to this conclusion that if you have 3 friends that you could reveal anything to, and if you're physically taking care of yourself, you can conceivably extend your life by 7 years. That is a staggering number, and that's how important connection is. Johann Hari, I think one of the great minds of our time, in this field, said that the opposite of addiction is connection. It's not sobriety. The opposite of addiction is connection. And really, all the techniques that are, the valid techniques used in drug addiction and alcoholism recovery have to do with relationships. Because when I was using, every single one of my problems was relational. Every single one, not one escaped. Every single problem I had to do with a fractured relationship. And I was at the center of it, and so, I had to do what I had to do to clean up my inner landscape, to bring light to it, to become the person that I was supposed to be in the first place.
Thank you, because that confirms for me that this journey is so much about right relation, resetting, renewing, renegotiating our right relationship with ourself, our community, our universe.
And there has been some research, anthropological research, showing that indigenous cultures didn't have the same kind of issues that we're experiencing today because they had community. They had a way of dealing with it. They danced, they celebrated, they did ceremony, they did things that united them together with people. And a lot of those issues just didn't exist.
Or they were solved within that matrix.
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
but it's about our society. I mean, it's not just our sad standard American diet, which is so sad, right? Not just about the physical health. It's really about our emotional health and our mental health in this society. So wonder we're not all insane, right? Growing up the way that we grow up in our society. And it seems like each of us have to find a means to find ourselves. It's such a radical thing to do, is be on that quest to be a seeker, no matter what your milieu is or your language is.
It's sort of like in
we're
the
all
West,
seeking that redemption of some sort.
In Western society, we're spoiled. We're just with the things that we focus on and the distractions, and because we don't have to focus on the fundamentals of just staying alive. So we get all this weapons of mass distraction surrounding ourselves, keeping ourselves in that state.
We're just saying that your journey, we relate.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So universally.
And why wouldn't you?
Yeah.
Really, why wouldn't you? We're all just walking each other home, as the man said. We're all just walking each other home,
sharing notes along the way,
and sharing notes along the way, and it's challenging, life, but at the same time, what's really interesting is that as crazy as everything is, it's really, I had this experience where I had to go, there's a friend of mine, I had to go, and he was in trouble. I had to bring him to rehab, and there was all this drama around that situation, that the attendant drama that goes with it. And it was a stressful day, and I got back to my room, and there was a TV on the wall, and I was really wound up, and I was looking on YouTube for some kind of meditation music or something, and instead I stumbled on this meditative slideshow And it showed all these different places on Earth, like these beaches in Borneo and the volcanoes in Hawaii, and just all beautiful slide after beautiful slide. And then the sadness came over me. I thought, I forgot how beautiful the Earth is, because I'm like, my head is in this loop of everything that's wrong, and I forgot this is a beautiful place with a lot of beautiful things happening. And in spite of the madness that's distracting the hell out of us, it's actually the safest time we've ever. This is the safest period of history that we've ever had. I mean, between 1939 and 1945, 1,000 people an hour were dying. That's not the case now.
Yeah.
And it's just like. And people, the people that are screaming the most about waking up are the ones that are the craziest, as far as I'm concerned. And so it's really, be a good sailor, do something nice for somebody, and don't get caught. When you go to Safeway, look at the cashier in the eye and let that person feel acknowledged. It's not so goddamn complicated. There's these books that are the size of Manhattan phone books on enlightenment. They make me want to go to sleep. It's like, it's a really it's a grandiosity that exists in the so-called spiritual community, as if there's more than one community, which is another statement of separation. Look at me, I'm more enlightened than you. I have a crystal in my pocket. Like really, I remember when crystals were still just rocks. Now they cure cancer, and so it's like, oh man, you just like step back and laugh at yourself. I mean, we have a front row seat to the circus right now.
Well said. We're at that period of time where we just had a new year. This is where people always think about, setting new goals, new aspirations, new ways. When people come and talk to you about the whole idea, what do you say? What is your advice?
I think New Year's resolutions are a setup for depression. Yeah. It's like, it's only too late if you don't start now. We're a very event-oriented group of species. Well, on January 1st, I'll stop smoking. Yeah, like, okay, whatever. Like nobody ever does. I mean, once in a while there's somebody that does, but by March they're smoke lighting up again. But I think it's not an event. It's it's like a process. It's like all of a sudden, January 1st, yes, I'm going to act like an enlightened, meaning, kind person. But before that, I'm going to be a prick. No, it doesn't work that way. It's this, to me anyway, my experience is that it's all been incremental.
Yeah.
Sometimes 3 steps forward, 2 steps back, and the key in my life is that I have a handful, and I mean, I know a lot of people, but there is a small group that I can tell anything to. And when I start going into the darkness, I have people that will help me recalibrate my compass back to north.
Mm-hmm.
And they'll, telling me, reminding me of who I am or who I'm not, one way or the either I'm, because you can go either way, either grandiosity or the darkness, which by the way, I think is the same thing, but help me recalibrate and remind me, oh yeah, okay, this is why I'm here. This is what I'm supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
And people all, right now, everybody's talking about community. Everybody wants to form community. Well, in order to do that, you have to know how to be in relationship.
Yeah.
It's not like, oh, let's set up this, I know I have a friend of mine that wants to get like a senior community of people that were, that took a lot of acid. And I said, good luck with that, So, I mean, it's a nice idea, but I mean, if you want to have community, learn how to be in relationship, and relationship is, first of all, giving the people the benefit of the doubt sometimes when stuff comes up, being honest, and, just being able to, do some compromising. But, unless you know how to be in a relationship, how do you expect to have a community?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Carolyn from New Jersey said, I need this humble humor so much today. If we don't laugh, we will cry. Keep on trucking, baby. And Anne
New
has,
Jersey. What exit in New Jersey?
yeah, yeah. Have her. Where are you located in New Jersey, Carolyn?
Yeah.
South Jersey, baby, South Jersey.
South Jersey.
And I'm
Nice, by the shore.
from
Nice.
Philly first, so don't mess with me.
Yeah. Beautiful. Thank you, Carolyn.
Yeah.
And Anne has her hand up. Anne, you want to add to the discussion, ask a question?
Thanks so much. I have to first say I'm from Brooklyn also.
Nice.
And there's just some incredible comfort in just, people always say of me, you know, they really appreciate my candor. And so I would send that right back at you.
Oh,
Your
thank
candor
you.
is just delightful and wonderful. On a different note, I have been a physician and endocrinologist for about 40 years
Mm,
and I've been a good doctor, but I've been a real failure at helping people find a moment of clarity that you describe so that they can enter this transformative experience. In particular, as an endocrinologist, I've dealt with a lot of people who are overweight or obese. Can you offer me suggestions of how I could have done that better? Or
and I think I got one better for you, Doc.
Go-
I got one better for you. You know, one of the mystical parts of being, for example, a third or fourth grade school teacher, right? I remember there's certain things that somebody told me in the third grade or in junior high school that at the moment that when they told me, I had no idea of the magnitude of the impact that that statement would have. So, you know, it's unfortunate that, and maybe as a physician, you have this like thing where, you know, you cured or you didn't cure, you failed or you didn't fail. It's a dualistic way of looking at it. How do you know that you didn't plant a seed that eventually will germinate into something? It's like people that go to therapy, right? So somebody's in therapy for 2 years, and then all of a sudden they get that moment of clarity and they say, I never needed that therapist. Not looking at the fact that for 2 years they've been in therapy, and all of a sudden they have this insight and they dismiss those 2 years because, you know, they don't associate that insight. So I would suggest to you that you've been planting seeds, but then, you know, you go to a different garden and you never look, you know, and you don't have the opportunity to see where how that seed germinated. I would suggest that you didn't fail. You did what you could, but that person didn't, you know, spontaneously erupt with insight.
I've actually often I've said to patients, let me just plant this seed, you know.
Yeah.
So
right.
yeah.
You know, like even in my work, one of the things I can't, you know, to survive in that field, I have to let go of the attachment. You know, I put my heart out, and whatever grains of wisdom I've garnered, put it out there. And sometimes you love these people, you get very attached to certain individuals, and you desperately want them to succeed, but that's not why I'm here. That, you know, that's kind of self-serving. I have to impart, and then my practice is loving attachment, not disassociation, but a loving detachment. And that's kind of hard sometimes, but I would suggest that maybe at the end, when we get to see all that stuff, you know, you go up and you say, oh my God, I planted Central Park.
I also find people are ready to change when they're ready to change, and it's really up to them. And all we can provide, and other people provided for me, is just some little nudge or some little encouragement. But it's really up to that individual when they're ready,
Always.
and all those forces come together.
Always.
Yeah.
Always.
Interesting.
So, you know, I just want to acknowledge you for your kindness. I also would, you know, really encourage you to, like, forgive yourself for not being God.
I'm trying. I'm working on it.
Wonderful.
It's like, I'm sorry, you're human. I'm sorry to tell you.
Damn it.
Yeah, damn it, right? Yeah, it's like,
Well,
sorry, I hate to inform you, but of your humanity. Listen, most people don't give a shit. At least you do. And so that ache that you feel, that your desire for that to alleviate suffering, that's a beautiful thing. I just, but it's also, alleviate your own suffering. And it's if you attach yourself, like it's not about you. And what you do is you seem like a very heart-driven person. Do that. And that's the thing about being heart-driven, right? You feel that stuff, right? You feel it. And you're like, come on. And at least, that you're one of the good guys. So what do you want?
world peace.
Why?
Just a little world peace. Yeah.
And that whole psychology behind being a doctor in the first place and being in a position of service, and also the whole emotion of all of that, and then being able to disconnect that. I mean, that's a whole study unto itself.
Right.
That is
You're
something.
a nice person. Leave yourself alone.
Beautifully said.
So nice to meet you, Ann Danoff.
Yeah.
Arrivederci.
Yeah.
And
Anyone else?
thank you for doing the good work. You're not failing. You're not failing. You're planting.
Yeah. Fantastic.
It just takes a while for some seeds to germinate. I find that in my own moments, my own dark nights of the soul, change was more possible for me when it was more painful to stay the same than it was to make the changes.
Right. Well, there you go. That's
I
right.
had no choice. My back up was against the wall, and I
Right.
had to change. And then it was a relief to change. It was, the way was, So.
Yeah, we call that a bottom.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. In my world, we call that a bottom. You hit a bottom. It doesn't have to be like way down. The other thing, you can get off the elevator going down at any floor. You know what I mean? You don't have to slam
Decide where our
down.
bottoms are. Yeah. So, being humble.
Some of us are really
What I'm
proud of our
hearing
humility.
throughout you is a sense of humbleness, and to know that we don't have all the answers, and that sometimes the easy answers are a false security. We don't have the answers.
No,
We're bumbling our way through. We're picking ourselves up off the floor again and again and again. We need to,
There's
no magic wand. There's no magic pill. There's no darshan. There's no fairy going to tap you on the head and then solve it. That goddess may give us some insight and a pat on the back, but we have to do the transformation for ourselves.
Right. Well, and also, people now that, this whole medicine thing is really taking off. And, I think that there's a lot of, certainly research says there's a lot of benefit to it. I think where people, stumble on that is where they do themselves a disservice, is to think that it's a magic pill. You still got to do the work. You still got to live a certain, create a lifestyle that is of benefit to others as well as yourself. And, it's not like that the medicine has a value, whatever that may be, but you still have to do the work. And I think, you still got to do the work, and it's, be nice to somebody and don't get caught, and
Ride the crest of the wave, stay out of the mud. Yeah.
It's really not that complicated. Like they asked the Dalai Lama what his religion was, and he said kindness. That doesn't need a lengthy explanation. We all know what that is, I think
I celebrate all of the tools of the self-help movement that have risen over the last few decades. And I feel for my own mother, who was of the generation where stiff upper lip, you don't talk about your problems, you present to the world a perfect picture, and her suffering was so internal. And I try to avail her of many of these things, some of which she partook and really found some comfort. But I really celebrate the fact that we can openly discuss this now. We've got so many tools. There have been so much research and techniques and tools that are supplied. They assist, but they're not, you still have to show up and apply them, right? It's really up to you. It's your journey. So
Also, there's a difference between contemplative sharing and compulsive disclosure.
okay,
there's a
examine
very
that one.
Yeah.
it's a real distinction between the two. One of them is just basically perpetuating the narrative, and the other one is where you're just trying to unravel this seemingly Gordian knot of unpleasantness within yourself. And so a lot of people think say just vomiting your stuff is somehow helpful, but there's a place and a way of doing that is beneficial.
Mm.
And then there's just using it, like I used to use my past as a license for bad behavior, and it got me nowhere.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that also coming back to what you were saying about this illusion of that we can just do something and something goes away. I know going back to my late teenage years and finding books about higher consciousness and the steps to consciousness, and we assume that we go to meditation and it's going to probably take 18 months, but then we'll be enlightened. Then we'll have reached that state of being that it will now be a stable experience forever kind of thing, rather than taking the steps and then continuing to do the work and then continuing to work. And now here I am still continuing to do the work. Yeah.
And their aspiration, people, I mean, I think one of the funniest things I ever heard is power yoga. What is that? Like, really? It's an Olympic sport now? And I think that, the best definition of enlightenment that I ever heard was intimacy with all living things. And
Nice.
That's an aspiration, right? Like, look at the crucifixion, right? The last thing he says before he's speared by a Roman and he's humiliated and tortured, he goes and he's looking over the crowd and says, "Forgive them, Father, they know not what they do." That's an aspiration. In the Course of Miracles, it says, it's okay to glance at the crucifixion, but not to dwell on it. And most people dwell on the crucifixion or their narrative. And so, intimacy with all, and all these things are aspirations. I aspire to, in this segment of my life, to aspire to forgiving everybody, everything, including myself, right? Because that's the daunting task, is to forgive oneself. And those are aspirations. They're not goals. You're not going to go to again, I don't mean to repeat, but a Tony Robbins seminar and expect to come out of there glowing in the dark. It's not going to happen. And I think it sets people up for an enormous disappointment. I really thought that when I stopped drinking and using drugs, the movie was going to go from black and white to color. That when you're in that world, like whether it's obesity or drug addiction or whatever, you think that if there's a notion that if you solve that problem, everything's going to be rosy. And what happens is you solve that issue so that you can go into the process of opening your heart, that's what it is. It's a heart expansion. It's like little by little to trust yourself, your intuition, and the world in order to open up your heart and be ready to get it slammed, because it will kick your ass at one point, but to get back up. And when I figure all this stuff out, I'll send you the memo.
Yeah, absolutely.
When you say that you needed to find love, your original quest was, I want to find love again. Love of another human being, of oneself, of the universe, of planet Earth, love just opens you up to tell us your story
path of
about
love,
that.
yeah.
Well, when I first made that statement, it was out of a feeling of desperation and loneliness. And now I after many years, I look at it differently. Yes, I have a partner, and one of the most remarkable women I've ever met in my life, but it's a different thing. It's like, what is it that that we can do together that may not have been able to be possible singularly. It's like, and really it's really about serving. And I don't mean that to sound like really altruistic. It's a two-way street. When you help somebody, or when you help somebody that was you at one point, it does something. It does something for the I experience. It does something for my heart.
Right.
And it's also, again, redemptive, because Jill asked me, what is it that it's my birthday. She says, what do you want for your birthday? And I looked at her and I said, I'd like to meet the legions of angels that kept this breathing, because there wasn't just one angel, it was legions of angels, because I've had near-death experiences. I was in really some situations that were lethal, and all of them, by the decisions, all this stuff happened predicated on decisions that I made, and those decisions were made predicated on my consciousness at that time, and so now it's a different thing. Love is greatly much more expensive, and I think one of the drawbacks, what happens with people, is that when they fall in love with somebody, they don't realize that was inside of them all along. And some people get obsessive about an individual because they think that's the only connection to the divinity within themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And so that fosters obsession, and all that stuff. And so when it's love, the relation, the love relationship later in life is very different than when I was 25. And these series of obsessions that I was in, searching for something that was inside of me all along. It's the Wizard of Oz. At the end, when Dorothy, when Glenda the Good Witch says, just click your heels 3 times and you'll be home. And she says, well, why didn't you tell me that before? And she goes, oh, darling, you would never have believed me.
Yeah.
So, so it's not like I didn't get these messages. It's like the doctor, if she's still on, how many times I had to hear the same, how many times did I hear the same thing before I actually listened?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I mean, I heard stuff 1,000 times until one time it got through the density of whatever was blocking it.
Tell us your stories of divine intervention. You've mentioned this metaphorically. Tell us those stories.
Well, like, for example, one was I was really in trouble with opioids. I was taking enough to put a small town to sleep. I mean, I was taking morphine, I was taking Oxycontin, I was taking Vicodin, and I was taking benzos. I mean, every day. And it was during the time that it was easy to get, and I mean, it was all legal, and I knew that I was dying, and literally, not figuratively. And a friend of mine was going to that had just come from Washington D.C. Got a job, and I was still living in San Francisco, and she was going to drive me to the airport, to Oakland Airport, and she was going to borrow my car for the month that I was away. And I was staying at this motel that was about a quarter of a mile from her house, and it was January. It was it was December 23rd, so it was cold. It was in Alameda in the Bay Area, and it was near the water, and it was very cold. And my friend Valerie, who got this message to come check on me, and it was cold, and it was a quarter of a mile away, and it was dark, and she didn't have a car. And so she walks to the motel, and it was one of those motels where the car is parked in front of the room.
Yeah.
And she knocks on the door, and I don't answer. And she goes to the desk, and the guy says, look, by law, I can't open the door. If you're worried about him, call 911. And she did. They came to the room, and I was starting to turn blue from overdosing on the pills. And I remember starting to come to in these waves of blue uniforms. It was so blurry. Had she not done that, I would not be here. That's one. And I've had a number of of similar experiences over the years where, I had nothing to do with it. It was just, something preventing me from dying. I
How
once,
does your friend describe the message that she got? Just an
she was
intuition.
angry at me, but she didn't tell me this until about a year later or 2 years later. And it was very upsetting. She said, she goes, I never told you this. It still chokes me up. She goes, I was so angry at you because I was going to have to tell your kids that you died. I was going to tell your family. I was the one that was going to have to inform them. And she goes, you have no idea of how. And I thought, and I started to realize how, on a very, very, very deep level, how my behavior affected other people.
Mhm.
How I was so self-centered and so consumed with my own, whatever, mishigas is a great word in Yiddish, that I had no idea of how I was affecting other people and how I was affecting my relationships. And it was a very crushing moment. She was kind enough not to tell me, that's how kind she was, to wait a year or two to tell me, so that I had some kind of foundation to receive that information. But it was a very crushing moment, and we don't realize, it's really easy to get caught up in your own day-to-day stuff where you don't realize how your behavior, your actions, your thinking affects the people next to you.
Mm.
And that is what's mindful, pay attention, to be mindful, take a minute and not think about yourself, God forbid,
What are some other stories?
Oh my, isn't that one enough?
That's a great one. Yeah.
Yeah, there are more, but everybody has something like that where they were, met with and that's what that's what growth is, to say, oh my God, that's what I'm doing, and say, well, and then be compelled to mitigate your behavior, and then start to become a caring person. You shouldn't get a
Learning
medal
to
for
let
being a
that
caring
community
person.
in.
People want to be above the fold in the New York Times if they give a guy $5. It's like, it's a reciprocal thing. It's not so, it's not, you're not being a martyr or anything like that. It's just, it's what we need to survive, to thrive. It's in the giving that one receives. Every serious spiritual piece of literature, it says that, but everybody's so afraid of not getting theirs, or, and it's not to say that people aren't suffering economically, but those things are also a result of a moral, a budget is a moral document. It reflects the morality. That's what a budget does. You look at it and say, well, this is where I spend my time. This is what I'm saying is important.
Mm-hmm.
When you are conducting a group therapy session or counseling session, however you call it, you're bringing a lot of heart to that. You're allowing people to come to these moments of realization. How are you doing what Anne was wanting to do, plant seeds, or that Anne has been doing and didn't recognize, planting seeds?
Yeah,
How
and
are
I
you
hope she did. She seems like a really nice person. Well, it's just, first of all, when you work with people that come from addiction, their BS meter is pretty, tuned in, and so it compels me to be sincere, and so basically, it's saying, I share my experience, strength, and hope, and whatever, as I said, whatever grains of wisdom I've garnered over the years of screwing up. My son one time was going through a breakup, and he was really, really sad, and he. The young breakups, right? It's like really hard on somebody, and we talk every night, and he'd cry almost every night. And then after a month, he started to, get a little helium in there, and he started to feel a little better. And he goes, and by the way, when my son was a teenager, I couldn't do anything right. I was desperately trying to work my way up from moron to idiot, just like up that scale. And at the end of this month, he goes, Dad, how did you get so wise? And I said, Nick, I royally fucked up and survived. I said, that's it. You
Yeah.
know, that's it, you know, and that's really, you know, we go through these dark nights and come out of it, and hopefully, you know, more compassionate, you know, more kind to other people.
Can you tell
Really.
us some stories of
But
what
not,
Go ahead.
well, and not, but not maintaining the denial, but by simply, it's one thing to acknowledge and to go through the screw ups in life like you're talking about,
Yeah.
but it's easy to go back into denial and
Right.
not make that transition that you're talking about, and how you've been able to maintain that path even today. I know it's an ongoing process every single day, but
Yeah.
you're maintaining that rather than, because it'd be easy not to. It'd be
That's
easy
because
to
I
say,
laugh at myself, bro. I
yeah,
mean, really, you know, but you know, comedy beautifully defined, tragedy plus time.
yeah.
I mean, that's what it is. And you know, to get to a point where you don't take yourself so seriously, you
Hmm.
know, I mean, you know, just
Yeah.
really, it's
Lighten
just,
up.
and yeah, lighten up, laugh at you. And if you can't laugh at yourself, you're in deep trouble, man. You know,
Yeah.
I mean, because I mean, just think about, you know, I was talking, I was with some folks last night. I think, you know, like the reason that it rains is because when you know, like when you die and you ascend, right? And all of a sudden your life passes in front of you, and all of a sudden you start laughing so hard at the things that you thought were important that you're just peeing. And so when I think of when it's raining, it's dying people ascending, looking at their lives, laughing so hard that they're peeing. So
You know, we can do a lot of that unraveling now, right? And so you have moments where you suddenly see, I've been going through these periods of seeing myself, my tortured, angsty, growing up self from my mother's eyes and going, oh God, Mom, okay, I get it. Like, yeah, I was a real idiot. I'm so sorry, but thank you. You know, I forgive you for the harsh words that you said because I would say them too to myself today. You know, it's interesting to unravel those knots in all those different ways. And if I can forgive her, it's about forgiving myself, right?
right,
And they're
right.
small moments. They're not like big deals, but you know, those knots that you just need to untangle. It just
Hmm.
feels like going to the cosmic dry cleaner or something, you know, just
Right, right.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's interesting.
Hmm.
So I guess we should celebrate those moments of realization and let them happen because, like you said, it's just a journey of increments,
Mhm.
small steps along the way that add up to some real mileage.
Well, one of the things that helped me when my father was an extremely violent guy. You guys were talking about The Godfather earlier.
Yeah.
You know, remember I think it was Fanucci, the guy with the white suit. My father had friends that looked just like that. My father looked like Marlon Brando in The Godfather. And there was a
Oh,
real, you know, there was a mixture, you know, there was a very passionate environment, and passion, you know, on the other side of that is violence. I mean, and so my father was an extremely violent guy, and you know, I had an unpleasant and turbulent relationship with him. And anyway, he was really at times unbelievably cruel, and he died. And I you know, I was so caught up with my mother and the family, everything was happening. You know, I never really got a chance to grieve. And one day I'm in New York, and this is years ago, and I thought I went into a phone booth and dropped a quarter in and started dialing his number. Halfway through, I realized, oh my God, he's dead. And then I started thinking, and I was in therapy at the time, and I started thinking, what happened to him that made it okay to be so cruel to his firstborn son? I mean, it's an auspicious position in an Italian family, the firstborn son and all that. And he was unbelievably cruel. And then I started wondering, well, what happened to him that made that okay for him to do that? You know, and I started wondering about what happened to him. And my therapist, I was talking to my therapist, and he goes, Frank, do you know what that is? And I said, no. He said, it's compassion. I didn't even know what it was. And I started thinking about him. What, you know, his parents died when he was young. He was in Sicily, was incredibly poor, so much poverty, and he was passed around to whoever could afford him at that time. You know, and I started thinking about what kind of harshness did he experience. And then where people get tripped up is forgiving that is not condoning it. It's recognizing that somebody once told me that one of the he was working with a guy who was dying, and all of a sudden the guy that was dying said, "Oh my God, it all makes sense. Everything that happened made sense." And it wasn't that it was okay that my father did that. It was that I was thinking about his suffering as opposed to my own that he incurred. Doesn't mean what he did was right. It meant it freed my heart. And if somebody would have asked me, well, what's the most important thing you ever did in your life? And I would say it's something I didn't do. I never laid a hand on my kid, ever. Either one.
You broke a cycle.
Never led. And when I look at my son, I have one grandson that's 10 and one on the way. And I look at the relationship between him and his son. His son has no clue of what it means to be afraid of his father. He has no idea of what that's like.
You broke the cycle.
And so, but it's generational. Like that stuff goes God knows how far back. And that's true of all of us, right?
Yeah.
And it's incumbent upon us as elders, right? In which so-called primitive cultures have elders. It's to facilitate the consciousness of the oncoming generation. It's to help facilitate a greater consciousness to those folks, and not in an arrogant way, in a loving, kind way, and a loving, intelligent way, conveying your experience. And, hopefully when they confront situations that require some kind of moral reckoning or reasoning, that, they have enough tools to make a decision that's in their best interest without it being at the expense of others.
So we're not only cleaning up our own stuff, we're cleaning up for the next generation as well, aren't we?
Absolutely.
So,
Absolutely.
yeah. And a little bit about going back in time. I mean, I can forgive the parents, the parents' parents, the parents' parents' parents, and all of that. So it's interesting how healing spreads, right? It spreads. I mean,
that's the power. Maybe the power of the message of the Dalai Lama is that simplicity of that message, keeping it down to the basics of compassion, of love, those kinds of things, and why that resonates so much with the planet, that this man can maintain the simplicity while we're trying to complicate constantly and say, no, it's not that complicated.
But how do you apply that? How do you dispense that? What does it mean? What are its ripple effects, right? Okay, then this brings up a story that I've been mulling over. So a friend of ours brought a young man, I think he was 30, to our house, and he wanted to talk about architecture. Okay, well, here we are near Phoenix, near Scottsdale, where Frank Lloyd Wright's Taliesin West is up the road, and Paolo Solieri's Arco Santi's halfway up the road, and all of this. So here are some architectural greats, some innovators. And so we're listening to this young man. His father was an architect. He's got plans to build housing for everyone, low income, ecological, and all of that. Really wonderful plans. And I said, and he was not from here, he's from Chicago or somewhere. So I said, well, later in the conversation, how do you think of Frank Lloyd Wright? Do you find inspiration there, or our Arco Sante, another famous place? And he goes, oh, no. I go, excuse me, what do you mean? He goes, well, Frank Lloyd Wright had a mistress, and Paolo Solieri abused his daughter. And I'm like, okay, we're imperfect people. Does that dismiss their work? Well, I can't condone that. I cannot condone their behavior. Therefore, I can't condone their work. And I'm like, I was like, what? Please tell me about this. He goes, well, you can't, yeah, exactly. That's what he said. You cannot separate the man and his behavior and his contributions. I'm like, okay, so you have not yet set out on your full journey of life. And these men, maybe fell off the way and weren't perfect beings and they weren't saints, but they made some wonderful contributions to the field that you're interested in. And no, I'm like, how do you get to be so perfect so early on, and that you're going to judge everybody around you on the perfection of their life, and you don't know their backstory, you don't know the in story, you don't know, you don't know about their emotional life. How do you dismiss them? I know this is going on in our culture quite a bit. How do you separate the founding fathers from the milieu in which they live, the great work that they did from their milieu? right? How do you approach that, Frank? I was
That's
Well,
curious.
as far as that guy with Frank Lloyd Wright, he ain't coming to my house for dinner. I can tell you that right now. Um,
Yeah.
uh, but you know, there's something I heard this on Bill Maher, something called presenting, where
Okay.
we look at people in history with the same mentality and consciousness that we have, you know, whatever's, you know, that we have right now. And
Judging by today's standards.
yeah, and by we're judging them by today's standards, and you know, that's sort of, you know, that's it's not realistic. Also, you know, to me, I look at that as like, I wonder who his or this individual's heroes are, you know, because they say, you know, don't meet your heroes, right?
Nobody's
So I
left.
wonder, you know, who does this guy aspire to? Because one of the things that I learned is that, you know, like for a while I was 20 feet from stardom, and you know, I met some people that in this field that
Okay.
you know, they're pretty big shots, and you know, one of them had a slight cocaine and hooker problem in Vegas, and you know, another one had a, you know, a sexual, you know, promiscuity issue, and you know, you know, and so, you know, they were amazing, you know, orators. They had a great mind, and they were incredible, inspiring speakers with their own issues.
Yeah. Right.
You know, listen, man, you know, let he who has not sinned cast the first stone.
Right.
Yeah,
So,
that's
or better yet, in the new age world, let
okay.
he who has not sinned cast the first crystal. You know,
To the glass house, right?
I mean,
I was also wondering about his parents. So your parents got divorced, or your parents shouted at you, or your parents did something wrong, and so you're going to dismiss all their loving care and the fact they brought you into this world and everything they've done for you. I mean, how do you get so black and white on this?
oh my
And
God, listen, you know,
yeah.
one of the things I learned is I don't have to attend every argument I'm invited to.
Yeah.
And
Write that one
Oh,
down.
wise one.
I used to look, you know, I used to go out looking for it, you know, because you know, I had my point of view, and you know, I mean, so much stuff is so incredibly silly. You know, look, you know, there's, you know, that, you know, like, you know, there was this one guy one time I was listening to NPR, and he was really adamant about, you know, getting notable, you know, gay people that were noteworthy, that were gay, and to, you know, amplify that. And I said, yeah, that's fine. I said, but let's talk about guys like Roy Cohn, you know, like J. Edgar Hoover, you know, like this, you know, let's not say like this is one group that's exempt from the human condition, right? Because it doesn't matter, you know,
Right.
it doesn't matter. I mean, and so I don't know. It's not my fight. You know, you
Well,
know,
my mother described her children as hothouse flowers, meaning she grew up on a farm. I'm like, at least mom, it was organic at that time, right? You know, she worked hard. She did this, she did that. But she goes, you kids, you're so sheltered. You're so coddled. You're so overnourished. Wait till the real world comes knocking. She meant in terms of geopolitics. She meant in terms of world
right,
conditions,
right.
right? What she lived through war too, right? So, you know, it's interesting how, and I guess, I guess to some degree, she's so right. We'll get our comeuppance, won't we? Um,
Well, it's one way of looking at it. I mean, you know, it's cause and effect. I mean, you know, it's just
yeah.
cause and effect. It's just, you know, I mean, that's how we learn. Look, without, you know, without, for want of a better term, without sin or transgression, how would we really understand virtue? You know what I mean? So,
Me
like,
too.
you know, there's some people, you know, that, you know, some people like that, you know, kids, like they put their hands in the socket and they get shocked and they don't do it again. But then there's guys like me that I get shocked and then I try a different finger, or then I try one foot in the water and then I put, you know, or put a metal knife in my teeth, and then, you know,
You're going to test the limits, right? You go
you
for the
know,
limit.
and then this, you know, because you know, some, you know, there's some people that get it right away, and there's, you know, and then there's guys like me that, you know, that don't, you know, or
Yeah.
didn't.
Yeah.
Yeah. I appreciate the sci-fi movies that really take that to the limits. what's going to happen when we try to mitigate all possible dangers from our world, and we're going to give up this freedom to live in this codified society, and he who breaks through is the hero and gets back to nature, right? There's some interesting themes on there. Where do you see society going? Where do you see the healing happen? Where do you see where we'll stop abusing the planet? Social justice will, like Buckminster Fuller tried to say, there's resources enough for all. It's just a distribution problem. Where we're going to, where do you have hope for the future? Do you see?
I'm flattered that you asked me
we're going to
such an
muddle along.
incredibly complicated question. Did I not tell you I was from Brooklyn, from gangster stock?
Sorry.
Well, Gandhi said there's enough for everybody's need, but not enough for everybody's greed. I think that certainly something's going on out there, and everybody has their view of it. I think that we're in a period of gestation, and I think part of it is, for some of us, it's sort of like the way I've heard this described is, say, if a woman starts having morning sickness and craving peculiar foods and doesn't know what's going on and is really upset and angry that she's sick and concerned, and she goes to the doctor and finds out that she's pregnant. Well, that morning sickness takes on a different, you're looking at that morning sickness from a different lens. Now it's still inconvenient and unpleasant, but not there's a purpose to it. There's a function. There's something, there's a promise
for it.
and a hope. And so you still, for that period of time when you're sick in the morning, it's a drag, but you're coping with it you're coping with it and living through it from a different point of view. And that's how one way I've heard it described. And that doesn't mean that there's not unpleasantness, and sometimes the birth can go wrong, but I think something's going on, and some of it really unpleasant. And and if you watch the news, it's just like I watch the news sometimes, and I look at certain people with in a position of power, or certainly in a position where they're getting attention, and I wonder, do you really have any idea of what's going on with people dying in the streets every day, and for and children not being attended to, like things like there's a respiratory thing going on with babies, and real bad stuff. And because of the profit-driven nature of the health industry, there aren't enough facilities to take care of pediatric patients, because dealing with adults is much more cost-effective. And so that's a moral statement. Privatized prisons is a moral statement. Is a morally reprehensible thing, because there's no incentive to rehabilitate. And so all these fundamental things that reflect that we're not taking care of each other. I am my brother's keeper. You are your brother's keeper. I don't give a shit what that other, I'm not. What do you mean I'm not? How did I survive? Somebody took care of me, when I needed taken care of. Somebody looked after me when I needed someone looking after. Really, it comes down to that. And I think that there's a lot of willful ignorance, intellectual laziness, willful ignorance, and people operating from a place of such fear of not getting theirs that they overlook or dismiss their humanity. And so we get into these different camps to develop a sense of safety, which is illusory, really. This sense of certainty, and faux community. One of the things that some of the extreme groups do, what we need is community, a sense of purpose, and a sense of self. Well, the Hitler Youth gave you that all at one time, but it's faulty. It's unsustainable, because it's not coming from our humanity. It's based on a fear. I don't know the answer. I just know that in my life, what I got to do what is capable of me, what I'm capable of doing, that's what I do. And sometimes I feel like I'm like the doctor. I'm not, what am I doing? Am I really doing anything to leave the place better than I found it?
Right.
I understand how she feels. I don't know how she feels, but I know how it feels to be in that headspace.
Mhm.
And so, yes, go ahead, please.
When your friend came to rescue you, she had a prompting, I need to go check on Frank.
Right.
And then she
It's a
was
great
angering
word,
you
prompting.
to
Yeah.
say, I would be the one, like she had a stakeholder. She was the stakeholder in your life. What you
Right.
did impacted her. She made that very clear to you. But aren't we all stakeholders for the whole planet, for
Yep.
all of
Yep.
humanity, not only the humans, but the non-human life, all of it, the consciousness, the whole field. We're a stakeholder in everything. So I guess for me, I think that it is such a sacred duty to wend our way forward, to apply the tools that we have, to pay attention, to show up, to try to find our way, to compassion, to gratitude, to be humble, to witness the all. Because in that healing, that's the only way we're all going to show up and be
Right.
present for each other. Right? It's important. All we can do is our one little drop in this vast ocean.
That was my thinking. Yeah.
Right.
I was gonna
But
say that, yeah.
but to understand that we're all stakeholders for the whole continuum here. What we do matters.
And
Right?
sometimes, like you say, you don't get that feedback, like the doctor shared with us, and that is that you put it out there, you'll never know whether there was an effect, what that happened, where it went. I mean, for example, I know in our little world here, I'll send out 4,000 newsletters, and I'll get one person, oh, thank you so much.
Right.
2 people,
Right.
thank you so much. And I'm not soliciting response. I'm just simply saying that's the world we live in. Is that we don't get that feedback. So we have to just let it go. You put out your effort. You're the one drop
show
in
up
the
because
ocean.
you feel like it's the least I can
You hold
do.
the space that you can hold. You do what
Yeah.
you can do, and you have to let go.
Yeah, and continue on. And so conversations like this for us are very healing.
Yeah.
Very, yeah.
It's unfortunate that there's a mindset that's been very prevalent in this country about inflicting pain or suffering builds character, and look at things in terms of karmically. They look at which is really a false way of looking at karma as some kind of retribution. When if I'm drinking too much and I have a hangover the next day, that's my body telling me, please don't do this. It's speaking to me in the only language that it has. So I do something that's really counter to my well-being, and my body tells me that I'm not, right?
Yeah.
So what's the difference between, if I'm a part of everything, what's the difference between me and the earth? The earth is telling us that what we're doing is creating an unsustainable paradigm for our well-being, and we're not listening to it. We keep drinking and we keep getting hungover, and we keep getting these indications from the earth that, hey, listen, like, I really want you here, but you're making it impossible to sustain yourself.
Or we separate our suffering, human suffering, from the other life species.
We're getting messages
We're
left
thinking
and
that they're
right.
not the same.
Mhm.
Yeah.
We're getting messages left and right about what we're, what we're doing is not good for us. And and like a drug addict or an alcoholic, do we have to wait until we're absolutely down to our last pint of blood till we start doing something? Do we have to wind up incarcerated before we realize this is not a good idea?
Yeah.
Do we have to be, in a hospital bed with all kinds of weird tubes coming out of us before we say, hey, maybe I should stop drinking and smoking? It's up to us, really. It's up to us.
Eating the wrong food. Yeah, exactly.
Well, what happens when we hit the brick wall? I mean, are we just going to play this out until there
Well-
is no choice but to change?
Well,
And then
one
we'll
of the
have
things
fewer
that I think are happening now is, with people that are getting radicalized, is that I don't believe there's such a thing as midlife crisis. What I think happens is, in one's life, that one gets to a point where they recognize that certain systems that they've employed to survive or thrive are not working. They're not delivering what they thought it would. So they do one of two things. Either they step into the unknown and get adventurous, or they double down on their old paradigm and try to get the square peg in the round hole at any cost. And when you do that, like, you're in a state of dysfunction. You're in a state of conflict. You're in this, like the word, the word,
You could see a few world leaders doing just that now too.
well, and your neighbors,
Yeah.
and so the word, the word integrity comes from also the word integrated. And what integrated to me means, you take a tree and it's got bark, it's got roots, it's got leaves, maybe it's got fruit, but all of these things, they're working without conflict. That's what integrated means. It's without conflict. It's an organism functioning without conflict. That's what integrity, that's where integrity comes from. And the greatest, one of the most poignant descriptions of serenity that I ever heard was from a lovely elderly woman who said, "When my conscience and my actions are in harmony." And I thought, well, that cut all the fat out of the definition, and I don't have to write a 200-page book on serenity. It's when my actions and my conscience are in harmony.
Right. Beautiful. Yeah.
I like to make decisions when my intuition and my intellect are in harmony, right?
That's a challenge.
Sounds good too.
When you pave the way forward.
And Martha asked that question. She says, what gives you hope?
Yeah, it's a good question.
Well, when I derive a great deal of pleasure when I'm facilitating a group of people or working with somebody that's suffering, I'm at my greatest. I feel the greatest when I'm not thinking about myself. Hope. Like sometimes, the times that I've had hope is usually in a time of desperation. Like I hope I find my car keys, which I've lost and I can't find for the past 4 days. But I don't know. I don't have too much hope. I don't have too much hope or despair. What I do have is, a desire to have a good day and possibly connect with somebody's heart in some way. And I don't mean to make it sound schmaltzy, as I said.
No, that's it.
Going to Safeway and making eye contact with the person that's masquerading as a cashier, the soul that's masquerading as a cashier, and see if I can get that soul to feel recognized and maybe have a laugh or a smile. Yeah. And things like that. It's kind of gotten really simple. I mean, I used to be a high sensation seeker. Studio 54, and all that stuff. And it's
now you look for the small moments.
It's different. I just usually my hope came linked to despair, and I don't despair that much anymore.
How about faith?
Sometimes I do, but not much.
And how about faith? How does that fit into your life?
I don't think much about that either. I just think that, I think I just go through my day, man. I really don't think about these things too much. I think, I wonder sometimes, I believe that, in the goodness of in the human heart. But I also know that there's evil out there, like for want of a better word, but there's the darkness and the light. And that's always been, I mean, the Sumerians wrote about this stuff. The Greeks wrote about this stuff. The Romans wrote about this stuff. Shakespeare wrote about this stuff. The Beatles wrote about this stuff. I mean, I don't think I've ever had an original thought in my life. I've just filtered through stuff that I've heard and say it in my own way. But I mean, I don't know if anyone's had an original thought.
We were comparing notes on when you are conducting a therapy session.
Well, it's counseling. I'm not a therapist.
Counseling session. I'm sorry. Counseling session.
That's okay. I just don't.
We're conducting what we.
I don't want you to get arrested.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
And you allow this magic to happen. You allow something to emerge that needed to emerge to hold a safe container for it. Can you describe some of what goes on in your counseling sessions and
Yeah,
how you let that happen?
I appreciate that. And I learned what
Yeah.
it meant. I learned what holding space meant from Ram Dass, actually. And he was describing what that means is to create an environment where the person or people you're working with feel safe enough to either express something or not express something, where I become, I'm a facilitator, but that's what, creating that environment. And so one of the things that I do, for example, where I work, is that by virtue of like saying, hey man, I know what it's like to sit in your chair. The difference between you and me is I've been away from your chair a little longer, but I know what it's like to be sitting in there.
Yeah.
And sometimes some very off-color remark or humor, which puts them at ease, hopefully, and allow the unfolding to take place without trying to fix it, because fixing it implies that something is broken.
Got it.
And what one of the things that I say is that, the reason these people are here, the reason you're here is because there's something inside of you that's always been so whole, always been healthy, always been good. But it didn't have a loud enough voice to get through the density of your trauma.
Right.
That's the part of you that's here right now, in spite of, and they may not even know what I'm talking about, but unconsciously, but somewhere my desire is that lands. And I also have to be okay with it not landing, and so to me, that's what creating a space is. It's like, like when somebody, like say I was talking to a guy who recently lost his wife of 55 years. And I told him that I don't know how you feel, but I know how it feels to lose somebody, which affords that person the dignity of their own experience. And because I don't know how he feels, but I know how that feels to lose somebody. And you try to maintain that frequency. And again, not be attached, to the outcome. It's jazz. Every day it's jazz. It's improvising every day, and just it's sort of like the baseball metaphor. You don't know where the ball is going to go, but you have to be prepared to field it best you can. And even if you drop the ball, just try to minimize the damage as much as possible.
Pick it up and carry on. Julia Childs knows that one.
The resistance, the trying to hold on, not allowing that flow. Being in that state.
Like when somebody, it's like, when somebody died and somebody says something ridiculously stupid, like, oh, they're in a better place. Well, how do you know? How do you know where they are? It's just your inability to be comfortable with that situation, as if you're going to catch the grief, which, by the way, is a very critical part of being human.
Grief. Talk about grief for a moment, because we didn't really
grief. The best description I've heard of grief was by Lynn Twist, who said that grief is the medicine for attachment. And that once you've processed the grief, that all that's left is the love.
Yeah.
Right. So now that's like, once you've processed the grief, the attachment to whatever it was that you had to that person, and now all you have is unconditional love for that. I don't understand much about unconditional love. I hear it talked about all the time, but I don't trust the people that are talking about it. But that is one way, that I experience glimpses into unconditional love. And with my kids, occasionally I get glimpses into it, but there's always an attachment. You got to love me back too, goddammit, or something, but unconditional love is an aspiration, like intimacy with all living things is an aspiration.
I find that in the inner work, the grief and the pain is such a vital piece of it, and that it takes it took courage and bravery to hold that when it shows up,
Mhm.
to not try to dismiss it, to not try to fix it, to not try to end it, but to be present with it and let it teach you what it's meant to teach you, and kind of carve out of your soul some bigger place for the joy and the love to be in you. I don't know, it's really interesting. I have just had to learn to be okay with the suffering and the pain and the grief and all of that,
Mhm.
and that it has a purpose and has its own grace to it. It's not, I don't seek it out, but when it shows up, I just learned to sit with it and let it do its job, right? And
Right.
not to numb it, but to just let it be the alchemical agent that it needs to be in you. And then it doesn't last long. It's like it's done its job and it can go. And it leaves you in a better, it leaves you stronger. It leaves you, it's almost like forging your inner steel, right? It just leaves you transformed in a better way if you let it do its work.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's
I
like
look
it
at
has its own grace to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I look at it as exposing my humanity.
Yeah.
I look at it as exposing my humanity, and the reason people, like, often people, like, they have let's say a breakup, and they don't recover from it, and they never open their heart again. And then there are folks that Brene Brown refers to as wholehearted, that you, in spite of that, you take the risk, because the other side of love is grief, right? That's the same that's the same wellspring that it comes out of. And that's why people are so hesitant about loving, because on the other side of that is grief. I used to want, when I was young, my big fear with a woman that I was with was that she was going to leave me for another guy. Now I'm worried, like, if I come home and my girlfriend doesn't recognize me, what I mean? It's like, there's always something, like, oh, I won't recognize her. I won't find my way home. There's like always this, it's always some kind of lingering concern, but it's it's just grief. It reveals our humanity, that you're capable of loving that deeply. It takes a courageous heart to do that, to really love that deeply.
Yeah.
Really takes a lot of courage. And those are the people I want to hang out with. Those are the people I want to hang out with, especially this time in my life. These are the people that I want around my bed when I'm, like, on my way out. Those are the people that I want. So I have to participate in the cultivation of that garden. I have to keep current, tell people I love them when I get, before I get off the phone, people that I love, so that if that's the last thing they hear from me, they heard that they were loved.
Yeah. Jean says, love and grief are twin sisters. And that's
Indeed.
interesting. Yeah.
Nicely put.
And that's kind of a full spectrum of spirituality, the way it should be interpreted, even though it's been misinterpreted so often. And that is you really do have to have that full spectrum of the human story, the human experience, combined with one's own journey and all of that, and not set some part of our life off in denial, thinking that we've become spiritual. So there's that
Right.
integration of it all.
Martha asked.
Go ahead.
I'm just laughing at the people that wear their spiritual uniform, and it's like, sometimes I joke around and say, when I meet somebody in Sedona, I just immediately say, like, I'm a very deeply spiritual person operating at 300 megahertz.
So they have the tradition of offsetting, in the Pueblo tradition of that, all that seriousness, and then having the clown element, that they The same elements.
The jester was the only one that was able to tell the king the truth without getting killed.
Beheaded.
He was the one that I actually was able to confront the king through humor or frivolity.
Well, you are the court jester for Sedona then, and keeping everything balanced.
Yeah, but the king tried to stab me once.
Martha says, when did you start to love and respect yourself? You've hinted at that journey on the way.
Well, it's a process. I mean, as I said, I lost my keys the other day, and I cursed myself for a half an hour. Just, like I'm losing my mind. That's just like, what if somebody else would have said to me what I said to myself, I'd have to kill him.
Well, that's, yeah.
And so, nothing is an arrival. I mean, in my experience, it's and part of what really, again, what helps me stay north are my relationships, because left to my own devices, my darkness is there waiting for me,
Yeah.
and it pops up, it just pops up. I didn't arrive at this place of inner sanctity. I just live my life a day at a time and do the best I can, and try to be kind when the opportunity arises, and maybe bite my tongue when I want to tell somebody off and stuff like that. I once heard, if you want to have a sense of self-esteem, well, then do esteemable things. So I try to live a clean life, and I find that I don't think about loving myself. I just try to take care of myself, and also taking care of myself is also respecting others. I mean, I don't want to have to be taken care of in a way that could have been prevented by my taking care of myself.
And how does a relationship help that reflection? I'm having Jill in your life, and does she hold up that mirror to make you feel better about yourself, that she sees love, she sees greatness in you, she brings that out of you?
Or what do your children say to you
Yeah.
that is
And your
the
children
most
as well.
rewarding?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, the thing is that of course it's a two-way street, but she's a model to me, because she, we're so opposite in our history. It's crazy. She's a nice Midwestern girl that grew, was born in Wyoming and lived in Utah, and her father worked for the Forest Service. Her mother was a kindergarten school teacher, and that kind of stuff. And it was like something out of a 50s television show. It was like, as opposed to my life, which was like somewhere between Blackboard Jungle and On the Waterfront and Godfather, but what she does reflect is, as what we all reflect, is what's possible. She's happy all the time, and the reason she's happy most of the time is because she's she's an artist, she's a musician, she's a sculptor, a chef, and so everything that she does feeds her soul. She's always feeding her soul, and whatever it is that she's doing, and she does it, she does it attentively, consciously. And and she wakes up happy every morning. And sometimes I wake up underneath a manhole cover and I got to work my way up to the sun. She does it automatically. And I think, well, that's possible. And that's what I found over the years, is that, I'm waking up like that a lot more often than ever before. And because we, the level of communication that we have, my negativity doesn't get through to her. Like when I'm feeling dark, it doesn't affect her. It doesn't, she doesn't take it personally. But that took years of her journey. It doesn't, because just because she grew up in that atmosphere doesn't mean that she didn't have her journeys and the dark nights of the soul. They just were less lethal.
Yeah, thank you.
Her stuff didn't get her in the newspaper, and so it's complementary in a way, but relationships are the most important things in our lives. I mean, really, love is everything. And I never thought that way before. I never realized how valuable and meaningful relationships are, because that's everything. Yes, moments of solitude and meaningful self-reflection are an important component. But I think they serve to deepen our relationships and to expand our relationships. I mean, that's my view of it.
Yeah.
And we're never really truly alone. I mean, we are sitting here in this, I don't know, in this universe. I mean, we have relationship with it automatically.
At the root, in my opinion, at the root of every fear is the sense of separation. At the root of every fear is the sense of separation.
Well said.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I discovered I discovered a fear that I had. It was so interesting talking to Fred Coolidge, and he was talking about dream analysis. And he was saying that a recurring dream is one to pay attention to. Who's had a recurring dream? And I'm like, well, I have. And the upshot of the dream was coming in out of the cold. I'm coming in out of the cold. And I thought, oh, okay, I'm willing to, hadn't interpreted my dream like that. I had a whole different interpretation of it, but I'm willing to look at that. How have I been coming in from the cold?
Yeah.
And I think that's a description of this whole hero's journey.
Yeah.
You're lost, and then you find your way and you're home. I think
And then
that's,
you do it again.
yeah.
Separate, the hero's journey, separation, initiation, and return. The interesting thing about Campbell's depiction of the illustration of that is that it's counterclockwise, which I found interesting. And that may be putting more meaning to it than
You're home, then you set out on a journey, and then you find your way home again after this.
Right. Separation,
Marvelous.
initiation, and return. You share your experience and you do it again.
Yeah.
And I mean, I never arrived anywhere. I'm still on the train, like I never, I've stopped off at certain places to look around, but I mean,
But if you come to the end of the journey, you're no longer here, right?
Yeah.
You're done. On to the next.
So they tell me. I'll let you know.
Yeah. Stay in touch.
I have no idea. I have absolutely no idea.
Yeah.
I guess you say we're born alone and we die alone, right? And then it's what do we do in between? What kind of community do we build? Yeah. So, well, do we have any final thoughts from yourself? Let's open up the mics. Whoever wants to
I
add
put that in
into
the chat.
this.
I think people are more listening, but they're welcome to ask a question, but they haven't.
Yep.
I already gave that option.
Okay.
But I do want to say, kind of like Carolyn said, keep on trucking, keep on stepping.
Keep on keeping on.
Keeping on. I mean, like you said, it's one day at a time. It's one
Moment at a time.
moment at a time. And the way that you've approached it, Frank, and you have obviously a very strong realness about you. There's no bull. You're dealing with the reality that surrounds you. At the same time, you have an open heart, trying to embrace the greater things of life and trying to find the balance between, the darker side, the shadow side of life, and then also embracing the light and saying, how can you find that balance and follow that path? And that's what's inspirational about your journey, is finding that way out, because the amount of trauma, of the addiction, all the different elements of your life that you went through, for you to come out the other end of that tunnel is amazing to us. That didn't do that journey. Thankfully, we didn't have to go through that. But
We didn't have to go to hell and back.
But but for us, it might be a much
it's
simpler.
amazing to me too.
Well, I appreciate how transparent and open you are. And you mentioned the 3 people in your life for whom you can tell anything. I have him, I have my sister, and I have one girlfriend from way back.
Well, you got
And
7 years
I
coming.
delight at those moments
Yeah.
when I meet people who start talking from the soul, and then I can talk from the soul and we can share. But it's not the anything, it's those snippets.
Yeah.
And what I find interesting is that you've laid your life through your film, through your book, through your motivational speaking, you just lay it all out for everybody. You're transparent to the world. And I thought, wow, that takes some strength. It takes some energy to be there, to be out there for the whole
Well,
world.
I appreciate that, but don't confuse me with somebody that's noble. Like I can't remember the bullshit, so I got to tell the truth, because I can't remember anymore. So it's not that I'm so noble. I lost my keys.
Yeah. Yeah.
I appreciate the humbleness.
That's such an
We're
awakening.
not used to putting anybody up on a pedestal. Don't worry about that.
Well, losing the keys is a great metaphor for how we think we're at a certain point and all of a sudden we've lost our keys.
I'm
It
guru.
reminds me of my friend who was a student of a guru, and the guru had this whole program of enlightenment. And he said, ultimately, the way to test your enlightenment is to go back home and spend the weekend with your parents.
There you go. There you go.
They'll cut you down to size.
They'll cut you down to size.
No, we're guru adverse here, and we appreciate the founder of this institute saying, I'm no guru. And in fact, what I'm doing is allowing everybody to understand their history,
Right.
their own inner capacity, where we're all mystics, we're all have equal access to the divine. So yeah, we're all about the egalitarian self-empowerment if we can all access this, but also to note it along the way, right?
Yeah.
To celebrate the fact that we can all find grace, we can all find our way in, out from the cold,
Yeah.
and find our way home again in community. Yeah.
And by the
So-
way, Martha says, check your jacket pocket. She has an intuition. Your keys are in.
I knew that was coming. I knew.
Oh,
dear.
wow. And
So-
Dr. Ann said, thank you. It doesn't, she just says it doesn't begin to express how wonderful these 2 hours have
Oh.
been with you. So thank you so much for what you're sharing. And I want to
Oh, put Anne back on. I want to hear that from herself.
put her on this.
Not just a text. Come on.
Oh,
Yeah.
Laura, put you back on here.
Thank
Here we
you. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you.
go.
You know what, like to me, like life has been, when you go for, obviously I wear glasses too, but when you go to the ophthalmologist and optometrist rather, and he puts that thing in front of your face and he goes, does it look better with number 1 or number 2? Right? And so like, so you were looking at, hey, doc, does it look better at number 1? Number 2?
You looked wonderful with everything. Really,
Well, and-
it's really
Yeah, but I
so.
hope that helped you. I really do, because you seem like I'm feeling, but the download I'm getting is, you're a really, you're a nice person. You've helped a lot of people, and you continue to do so. Just showing up and smiling and making a person feel like they're seen. Doc,
We have a mutual friend, and that
your
mutual
job.
friend, Anne, is really brilliant.
Oh, yeah.
So,
Oh,
in
yeah.
your
I
work.
know. Tony's, yeah. Well, me? No.
Yes.
Like he said, I'm just a regular guy. Just
You're a
kind of-
regular guy with a narcotics license. I find that very appealing in a
Oh,
woman.
no.
But Ann, do
I didn't
you
sign
know
up.
where your keys are?
Check the pocket.
All right. Thank you so much. Thank
Do
you,
something
Frank.
nice for somebody and don't get caught.
Beautifully said.
Okay.